It's Christmas Eve, my friends, and I'll be here if you'll be here. And joining me today is former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirschner and journalist covering climate change at Earther, managing editor there, Brian Kahn. I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Ho, 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 my friends. Welcome to a very special Christmas Eve edition of Stand Up with Pete Dominic. No, I'm just kidding. There's nothing special at all about this show. It's just me. You think I have a team of producers that can have all kinds of different elements that are special for this episode? It's a normal episode. I'm just doing this voice and playing this music. Okay, all right. Sorry about that. That was fun. And you know what else was fun? Last night, hanging out with everybody in the Zoom hangout. Over 65 stand-up subscribers joined us and hung out. And then the after party on the Discord platform. Man, I love you guys. Getting to know so many people from all over the country, all walks of life and backgrounds. And I just love it. And so do so many of you. So sign up now for a subscription. Give me a Christmas present. Give yourself a Christmas present. The present of community, enlightenment, and learning together with me every day here on Stand Up, where I usually talk to two experts on a broad range of issues that affect you, your family, your community, your country, and your planet. That's what I've always done, and that's what I'll continue to do every day here on Stand Up. So thank you for joining me today. I got two awesome guests, and of course, as I do every day, yesterday's audio and the news dump, COVID updates as well, as there's so much news each and every day. Hard to keep up with it, but join me here on Stand Up every day, and I'll give you a great rundown of what I think is most important, and then you can decide whether or not you do. And hello to Rob out in Southern California, who gets up with me in his ears while just laying around in bed every morning. Those of you that are motivated to take the show with you on your walk and take pictures, send those nature pictures my way. I'm sharing them every morning with subscribers. You can wake up to the email and the show. So good morning, Rob. Good morning, anybody else who's listening in the morning. And Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to you all. I'm planning on doing the show. I still haven't decided. It all depends on how everything's going, everybody. You know, I think maybe I'll take a day off. Christmas, maybe Christmas Eve, maybe a couple days this week. So far, what is it? Wednesday? This is the Thursday show. Yeah. So I guess maybe I'll take Friday off. And then I think I'll be back at it next week because I want to make sure I keep promoting here at the end of the year. GiveWell.org, who is my sponsor. You know, contractually, the deal I made with them is really I just have to do a read once a week. I do a podcast every day, but I just feel like I got to do more. And so I'm trying to promote their work each and every day in different places, social media, the private parties I've been hosting, the stand-up community, and everywhere I can to get folks to donate to GiveWell, which is an amazing charity that is the best at doing research to find out how to make your dollar go the furthest. So if you're donating money here at the end of the year, go to givewell.org/standup. And that's why I'm not taking next week off, or at least I'll be posting podcasts every day. Maybe I'll take a couple days off if I can. But I hope that you're taking time off. I hope that you have a great time with your family here at the end of the year. Of course, it's Taint Week next week. At least that's what I call it, the week between Christmas and New Year's. And I hope to have you listening next week as well. All right, I've got two great guests, as I've told you, joining me today. A bunch of things I want to play. So shall we get to it, folks? Yesterday, President Trump continued his pardoning spree. He pardoned Paul Manafort, who is a horrible guy who basically worked for the Russians. He also pardoned Roger Stone. What do I need to tell you about this guy? A horrible creep who worked with Julian Assange to make sure that the DNC leaks were leaked at the right time and all kinds of other awful stuff. And he also pardoned Jared Kushner's father, and probably because Chris Christie, who was the prosecutor, put Jared Kushner's father behind bars, has been mean to President Trump, and by mean saying he should pay attention to reality. He lost the election, and so to get back at him, he probably pardoned Charles Kushner. But Former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, when he was a prosecutor, prosecuted Charles Kirschner. He was on my friend Margaret Hoover's show on PBS Firing Line not too far back. And this is what he had to say about Charles Kirschner and the crime that he committed. Here's Chris Christie.
I just think that it was so obvious he had to be prosecuted that, I mean, if a guy hires a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law and videotapes it and then sends the videotape to his sister to attempt to intimidate her from testifying before a grand jury, do I really need any more justification than that? I mean, it's one of the most loathsome, disgusting crimes that I prosecuted when I was U.S. attorney. And I was U.S. attorney in New Jersey, Margaret, so we had some loathsome and disgusting crime going on there. But I just laid out the facts. And any objective person who looks at the facts knows, confronted with those facts, I had a moral and an ethical obligation to bring that prosecution.
But that did not stop Donald Trump from, of course, giving a pardon to Charles Kirschner, Jared Kushner's father. And it's also, a lot of people are saying, a precursor to him giving pardons to other family members, seen as that, I guess, you could consider Charles Kirschner a family member of the Trumps. All right, and next we've got continued outrage across the military about the Blackwater contractors who were pardoned. Of course, Trump was lobbied by Eric Prince, who founded Blackwater, and I talk about that with Glenn Kirschner extensively coming up. But here is United States Army Major, retired West Virginia Senate member representing 7th District in West Virginia, Richard Ojeda, one of the more high-profile Iraq Army veterans who's pissed off, took to Twitter and made this video.
What's up, everybody? Major retired Richard Ojeda here, and I'm absolutely just sickened. You know, Donald Trump is now pardoning some of these Blackwater guys. You know, anybody who spent time in Iraq and had to deal with those Blackwater guys, man, those guys would drive through friggin' areas and just randomly shoot at people. You know, they would cause so much trouble for other active duty units coming through areas. We would end up finding ourselves going through an area that become a hornet's nest because previously, right before that, they drove through there shooting shit up. You know, they would clear alleys with fire. You know, I mean, they did not give two shits. This right here is nothing more than Donald Trump daggone doing something good for his good old buddy Eric Prince, you know, who happens to also be Betsy DeVos's brother. This is a shame. This is a shame. You know, let me tell you something. There were innocent people that lost their lives, but I guess it's okay if they were Iraqi. I guess that's the message right now. It's okay if you killed Iraqi civilians, as long as it's okay with Donald Trump. It's absolute sickening, folks. You know, there's people over there that didn't deserve to die. And daggone Blackwater was nothing but a bunch of daggone cowboys that wanted to act like they friggin' were all that in a bag of chips, and all they did was cause trouble for us active duty troops. It's an absolute shame, man. What a disgrace. Sappers clear the way, airborne all the way.
Okay. Richard Ojeda, pretty fired up. He says daggone a lot, and I don't know what he said there at the end. I guess that's a sign off, but and, you know, Glenn Kirschner is also pretty fired up. He's former Army JAG, and he joins me to talk about this more coming up in a few more minutes. All right. Last night on the Zoom, a couple of people mentioned how great it was to see the Secretary of the Interior be Congresswoman Deb Haaland, because she is the first Native American Interior Secretary. Is she the first cabinet member also, I would imagine, who's a Native American? Is there anybody I'm missing? Anyway, President-elect Joe Biden has chosen New Mexico Congresswoman Deb Haaland to head the Interior Department, which make her the first Native American to lead the agency that oversees the country's natural resources and public and tribal lands, if she's confirmed by the Senate. I talked about this with Brian Kahn later on the podcast, but tribal leaders and organizers had pushed Joe Biden to choose her. She's a member of the Pueblo tribe of Laguna that's lived on the land that's now New Mexico for 8 centuries. And, of course, the Interior Department has always had a contentious relationship with the 575 federally recognized tribes. And her nomination is just, it's so important for so many reasons. She's obviously very qualified for the job. And I wanted to play a little bit of her acceptance speech from the other night. This is from a few days ago. Here's Congresswoman and hopefully future Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland.
I'm proud to stand here on the ancestral homelands of the Lenape tribal nation. The President-elect and Vice President-elect are committed to a diverse cabinet, and I'm honored and humbled to accept their nomination for Secretary of the Interior. Growing up in my mother's Pueblo household made me fierce. My life has not been easy. I struggled with homelessness. I relied on food stamps and raised my child as a single mom. These struggles give me perspectives, though, so that I can help people to succeed. My grandparents, who were taken away from their families as children and sent to boarding school in an effort to destroy their traditions and identities, maintained our culture. This moment is profound when we consider the fact that a former Secretary of the Interior once proclaimed his goal to, quote, civilize or exterminate us. I'm a living testament to the failure of that horrific ideology. I also stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and all the people who have sacrificed so that I can be here. My dad was a U.S. Marine, and no matter where we were stationed, he made sure we spent time outdoors. Time with my dad in the mountains or on the beach, and time with my grandparents in the cornfield at Laguna taught me to respect the earth and to value our resources. I carry those values with me everywhere. I'm a product of their resilience. As our country faces the impacts of climate change and environmental injustice, the Interior Department has a role to address these challenges. The President-elect's goals, driven by justice and empowering communities who have shouldered the burdens of environmental negligence. And we will ensure that the decisions at Interior will once again be driven by science. We know that climate change can only be solved with participation of every department and of every community. Coming together in a common purpose, this country can and will tackle this challenge. The President-elect and Vice President-elect know that issues under Interior's jurisdiction aren't simply about conservation. They're woven in with justice, good jobs, and closing the racial wealth and health gaps. This historic moment will not go by without the acknowledgement of the many people who have believed in me over the years and had the confidence in me for this position. I'll be fierce for all of us, for our planet and all of our protected land, and I'm honored and ready to serve. Thank you again.
Such a big deal. That gave me chills at the beginning when she got emotional. I got emotional. And really excited to see what happens at the Interior Department, where I know a few people that work, and really very important responsibilities that they have. Such a big deal that she will be their leader. And one more story I wanted to mention. Everybody reporting, I'll read from Axios reporting, but President Trump has defied Congress, and he vetoed a $740 billion defense spending bill. The Department of Defense's budget, he vetoed it. The House and Senate passed the bill with veto-proof majorities, so they're going to have to come back and have this override fight on the 28th and 29th. But this bill has been passed by Congress every year since 1967. The president objected to something in the bill called Section 230, to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which grants liability protections for social media companies. I have no idea what that's about. I have no idea why he's rejecting that. The more understandable issue that he's rejecting is that he opposes legislation in the bill that proposes renaming 10 military installations currently named after Confederate leaders. So he's not going to pay the current active duty military people because he's mad about traitors not having their names on military bases. The reaction was swift from the president's critics. Here is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeted, Donald Trump just vetoed a pay raise for our troops so he can defend dead Confederate soldiers. Democrats will vote to override it. Nancy Pelosi tweeted, the president's veto of the National Defense Authorization Act is an act of staggering recklessness that harms our troops, endangers our security, and undermines the will of a bipartisan Congress. Next week, December 28th, the House will take up the veto override with bipartisan support, and a lot more reaction to that. But, I mean, Confederate soldiers? Really? Wow. What's more of an action to support white supremacy than that by the president? An overt action. Rough stuff. And speaking of rough stuff, time to get to your COVID-related headlines. And as it stands here on Christmas Eve, 2020, December 24th, total confirmed cases of American deaths, 6:30 p.m. Wednesday. It was 325,358. Total confirmed cases, 18,402,363. New York City is going to enforce quarantine for UK travelers with visits from sheriff's deputies. Antarctica reports the first coronavirus cases. Taiwan has reported their first coronavirus case in 8 months. Over 1 million people in the U.S. have received the COVID-19 vaccine, and the U.S. has bought another 100 million doses of Pfizer vaccine. In a Pew Research Center poll, nearly 4 in 10 Americans don't want to take the COVID vaccine. The Department of Health and Human Services is planning to spend $250 million to convince the U.S. that it is safe, with a national education campaign to build public trust in the vaccine. And in a study from the University of Edinburgh's School of Engineering, the researchers found that masks block 99.9% of large COVID-linked droplets. Face masks reduce the risk of spreading large COVID-linked droplets when speaking or coughing by up to 99.9%, according to a lab experiment with mechanical mannequins and human subjects. That's how they conducted it. They didn't just have people masking at each other. I want to be a part of that study. Imagine if that's your job. That seems like fun. And across the country, states are imposing the strictest COVID-19 lockdowns since the spring. How's it going in your state? New video is circulating showing COVID-19 patients lined up in the Southern California hospital hallways as surge continues. Nurses are demonstrating outside an Orange County, California hospital as COVID crisis worsens. Dozens of nurses picketing Wednesday morning across Orange County, protesting the deteriorating conditions inside hospitals, which have been brought to a breaking point due to the exponential strike in coronavirus cases. And while all that is happening, don't let it stop you, actor Kirk Cameron. Yeah, Mike Seaver of Growing Pains facing plenty of righteous criticism for organizing at least 2 events in Southern California in recent weeks where dozens of maskless people stood shoulder to shoulder to sing Christmas carols and protest of state and local stay-at-home mandates. Great. That is fantastic. What an unbelievable asshole. And those are your COVID-related headlines. And now it's time to get to the news dump.
They call them dumps, big, massive dumps.
All right, this is the quick, fast headlines that aren't political related. They aren't COVID related, but they're undercovered, and I want to give them to you right now before we get to my first guest, Glenn Kirschner. Let's start in the NBA, which is back in season, apparently. They announced, though, that they'd be fining Houston Rockets star James Harden $50,000 for COVID-19 protocols violations, and then they postponed the game last night, Wednesday night, the season opener with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Houston, Oklahoma City postponed because of a coronavirus outbreak. The NBA suspended the previous season in March due to the pandemic, but then they returned to play late July in a bubble in the ESPN Wide World of Sports near Orlando. So we'll see what'll happen from there. But the NBA said in a statement that 3 Rockets players had returned either positive or inconclusive tests for the virus, while 4 others were quarantined because of contact tracing. Apparently, James Harden violated the rules when he attended a private indoor party on Monday. Good job, buddy. 803,000 Americans have filed first-time jobless claims in the week before Christmas. The Department of Labor reported 803,000 initial unemployment claims last week, a drop from 89,000 the week prior, a drop of 89,000 from the week prior. Number of Americans on unemployment benefits remains high, though figures released Wednesday were lower than the 888,000 that economists had expected. You know, I lost my job around this time last year, and I wrote a piece for Katie Couric's media outlet on Medium, and just reshared that. So if you've lost your job, reach out to me, and I'll share that piece with you if you haven't read it yet. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. And a year later, doing pretty good. Thanks to those of you that have supported me with a paid subscription. If you haven't, go now. All right. A building in Baltimore in a high-rise exploded, injuring 23 people Wednesday, temporarily trapped a window washing crew on dangling scaffolding. 21 of the victims, all construction workers, were brought to area hospitals following an explosion, which caused a partial roof collapse. The city's fire department tweeted that at least 9 of the victims were in critical condition, while another was in serious condition. Yikes. Dangerous jobs. General Motors announced they'd be recalling nearly 840,000 vehicles in the U.S. for suspension problems or because the front seatbelts can fail. The front seatbelt can fail? Seatbelt recall covers 624,219 2019 through 2021 Chevrolet Silverado, GMC Sierra pickup trucks. Also included a 2021 Chevrolet Suburban, Tahoe, and GMC Yukon. Well, those giant tanks should be recalled because of how much gas they guzzle. Sorry to make you feel guilty if you drive one, but GM says in government documents that the seatbelt brackets may not have been secured to the seat frame. Good Lord. That's what you get for buying one of those tanks. Okay, sorry. All right, that is your Christmas Eve news dump. Ho, ho, ho. Big, massive dumps. Thank you, John Carroll, for that sounder. I appreciate it. All right, joining me now, my first guest is one of your all-time favorites. He is a big media sensation now, where you can see him regularly as a legal analyst on MSNBC. But more importantly, he's got his own YouTube channel now, and he's massive. He's huge on social media, on Twitter, at Glenn Kirschner 2. And I always love when I get to talk to this former Army JAG officer, a guy who was a federal prosecutor for 30 years, who worked directly under Robert Mueller and reported to him, as well as a whole bunch of other people that he knows in the federal government. Makes him a great source and judge of credibility on a number of these issues, which I talked with him about. Here is my latest. It's time for the Kirschner Report with Glenn Kirschner. All right, there he is, everybody. Glenn Kirschner, thank you for joining me, sir. I appreciate it. You are fired up about these pardons, and I am too. I'm just not as articulate and as credible on why it matters and what happened. But I mean, emotionally, why are you so upset?
15 pardons is bad, Pete, and as bad as the political pardons are, right? Because he pardoned Republican congressmen or former congressmen, one of whom stealing from his own supporters, his base, his constituents. So the message is it's okay for politicians to steal from their base because I'll pardon you. He also pardoned Chris Collins, who, of course, insider trading. It's okay to violate financial laws if you're enriching yourself and your family. I'll go ahead and pardon you. And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that those two men were among the earliest supporters of Donald Trump's run for president. Pure coincidence. Then he pardons a handful of guys who lied to the FBI about their contacts with Russia, right? Particularly if you're doing that to help out the Donald Trump cabal, we're gonna pardon you for those. But the worst of all is his pardons of the Blackwater murderers. The reason that one hits home for me is because my former office, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, investigated, indicted, and tried 3 times the Blackwater killers. And let's remember what they did. These were Blackwater contractors, wannabe soldiers that were sent over to Iraq to provide security details for dignitaries. What they did was one morning, for sport, they opened fire on innocent, unarmed Iraqi civilians, men, women, and children, killed 17, injured another 14. My former office and the lead prosecutor on the case was a very good friend named Pat Martin. Pat and I tried murder cases together when he was in the Homicide Section before he went over to our National Security Section and handled the Blackwater case. I helped behind the scenes on Blackwater. I was not a member of the trial team proper. So Pat poured his heart and soul into that case for nearly a decade, as did an entire team of FBI agents, of prosecutors, of paralegals, of victim specialists and victim advocates, Iraqi civilian witnesses, U.S. civilian witnesses, military members, and also people may not realize that members of the Blackwater team testified against their 4 fellow members who slaughtered, murdered those innocent Iraqis, right? And then Donald Trump, with a sign of the pen, tries to wipe that all away. So, first of all, it really felt like a random drive-by shooting of the rule of law by Donald Trump. And unfortunately, people around the world will take away from that our U.S. citizens overseas get to kill people with impunity. But I implore people not to take away that message. The message I would like everybody to take away, Pete, is that for nearly a decade, my office, my friends, my colleagues brought the resources of the federal government to bear on trying to win justice for those 17 murdered Iraqis, murdered on their soil. And that is the best of the United States of America, what those men and women did to try to vindicate what the Blackwater killers did to those innocent Iraqis in their own country. That's the best of America. Don't take away that Donald Trump represents us by signing his 4 pardons for those Blackwater killers. That's the worst of America. That ain't America at all. That's a corrupt criminal president who is about to be run out on the rail.
Unfortunately for us, for you, and I obviously agree that I wish that was what people would take away. They aren't going to take away. That's what you wish the perception would be. But a country who allows these killers to go, who pardons them, they're not going to hear Glenn Kirschner and probably the vast majority of people's interpretation. They're going to see that we just allowed these guys to go. And there's not much you can do about that. Repairing that kind of damage is, it's like it would be like you arguing the best of America, we don't torture. Well, we did. We did torture. And unfortunately, that becomes part of our reputation. It becomes a recruiting tool for terrorism as well, as we know. But why? Talk to me just a little bit about, is there murkiness around the law? Who has jurisdiction when it's a private contractor operating in a foreign conflict where the United States military is also there as kind of a partner and occupying military force? Who has jurisdiction to prosecute crimes?
We have concurrent jurisdiction. So we have jurisdiction when we have our, I don't want to call them forces because they weren't military. They were contractors who were sent over there to be part of a protective detail for U.S. diplomats. So we retain jurisdiction over those people for crimes they commit when they are so deployed. Iraq also would have jurisdiction over them. That's where it gets murky. But we have, what's called concurrent jurisdiction, where multiple countries could potentially exercise criminal jurisdiction over them. But we won't often let that happen to people that we send overseas. Even when they do wrong, we would rather bring them back and have them stand trial in the American criminal justice system. So this one on the jurisdictional front was not all that murky. These Blackwater killers belong to us for purposes of prosecution, and we did what we were supposed to do. Donald Trump is the one who did wrong.
So you talked to someone today who was involved with this case. Is that Pat Martin? Is that you're saying?
Yeah, the lead prosecutor in the case.
It's interesting to see the reaction of some of my friends who are combat veterans in Iraq around those areas where Blackwater operated and committed more crimes, by the way, than just this one. This is the one these guys got caught and prosecuted, but they did a lot of bad shit there. And to see the combat veterans who were there say, first of all, the Blackwater guys made our lives harder. They made everything harder when the crimes they committed, and we had to answer for them. We had to clean up their mess. Then you've got people like your friends, prosecutor, activists, family members, the Iraqi, the victims' families as well, and advocates there. The point I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of parties who are interested in this case and who worked for years, as I think you said, to prosecute this case. And then you've got the members of the military who were affected by the actions of Blackwater. And, you sit here all the time, Glenn, your whole tagline is justice matters. And in this case, it's been undone. And that Eric Prince walked up to these guys and said to them at some point in the last, 24 hours, we never leave anyone behind.
And it's so upsetting.
Yeah, Donald Trump undid justice. There's no two ways about it. And from my perspective, Pete, this is probably the greatest affront to victims' rights that I have seen in my lifetime, and certainly in my 30 years as a prosecutor.
How so? That's something to say, given your career. What you don't?
Because you have 17 murdered Iraqi brothers and sisters, human beings, unarmed, innocent. You know who was killed first? A young man who was driving his mother through this checkpoint. She was a physician, so she could get to work at the local hospital. None of these people were doing anything wrong in their own country. They were waiting to get through a security checkpoint when these guys opened fire on them for sport. 17 killed, 14 injured and survived, all of whom had rights as victims. That's why I say this by Donald Trump is the single greatest affront to victims' rights that I've ever seen.
When you think about or read about the history of the presidential pardon, there are always some controversial pardons. Why this person? What is the president's interest in that person? Who advocated and lobbied on behalf? And by the way, the line of villains that were advocates for getting these Blackwater guys off. I mean, obviously starting with Eric Prince and probably his sister, the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, but more importantly, people like Eric or whatever his name is, Hegseth, and a bunch of awful Republican congressmen all advocating on behalf of these murderers. People should know who those people were as well. Who is carrying the water for these guys and getting them pardoned. But Glenn, what is the kind of the history of the presidential pardon power, which to me, by the way, is ridiculous that he has that power. We can go into the Constitution, I suppose, but in the past, what have presidents done that has been anywhere near the kind of pardons that this president has done? Not only just these last 15 and the commutations before, but throughout his presidency, people like Dinesh D'Souza and Joe Arpaio and Magneto from the Marvel Cinema Universe.
Trump uses it to reward his friends and his criminal associates like Mike Flynn and commuting Roger Stone's sentence. And he probably also uses it to enrich himself. I don't believe for a minute that there wasn't some money that was either promised or maybe already exchanged hands in connection with some of these pardons. And yes, the presidential pardon power, unfortunately, is pretty unconstrained in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2 says the president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons. There is no limitation on it. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of the Wild West in the Constitution itself that, we have never seen fit to go into court and challenge in any serious way. I hope to hell that changes, because the Roger Stone sentence commutation, a kind of pardon, is not only corrupt, but the granting of the sentence commutation in and of itself is a criminal act in furtherance of a conspiracy to obstruct justice. So I will be beating the drum once Joe Biden takes office that we must go into court and try to undo the Roger Stone sentence commutation because it itself was a criminal act. And if we always throw up our hands and shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, then we can expect more of what we just got from Donald Trump. So we have to take these things into court. We have to challenge them. We have to try to legislate and channel to the extent we can the pardon power. People will say, but it's unconstrained in the Constitution. Well, fine. Let's try some thoughtful legislation, right? Let's take a maiden legal voyage, pass some laws that say, I don't know, you can't pardon somebody in exchange for a political favor.
Right.
And let's take it into court and fight it. What's the worst that can happen? The judge will say, I'm not feeling that legislation. Feels to me like it is a violation of the constitutional pardon power, and I'm going to strike it down. At least we've been in the game. At least we've fought the good fight.
Yeah, there's some reporting I saw that every single person who President Trump has pardoned was in some way transactional, where it was personal to him, to his benefit. And that's like the coach starting his son at quarterback when he's not qualified. It's like he's only, I guess that's a flawed analogy, but the idea is he was getting something out of all of these. And usually when you think about presidential pardons, I mean, ideally, I'd imagine that the president's sitting there and they give him a binder and they make a case. This guy went to prison 20 years ago. He's done his time, and you learn about him and you can decide if you think that he deserves to be pardoned. That kind of thing, I think, would be the norm. And in this case, these were his friends, people that have shit that can hurt him. So, I mean, it's so transactional and so personal, and it's like every one of them. Let me, though, ask you about his pal, Bill Barr, who it was Bill Barr's last day. You've been on TV talking about this. You, I think, have an episode for your YouTube show about this, Justice Matters. Everybody should be subscribing to Glenn's YouTube channel. Yesterday, though, he had a press conference, which was ostensibly to be about follow-up on a case from like the late 80s, Lockerbie, right? Is that what it was? But he said a lot of things in yesterday's press conference, which I think are really important. And he's done a lot of things, or not done a lot of things, that have maybe surprised some folks. What stands out to you on his last couple weeks?
So first of all, if we back it up a few weeks, the moment he announced publicly that there was no systemic fraud undermining Joe Biden's win, I thought to myself immediately, oh, he's already got his pocket pardon. There's no two ways about it, because he's corrupt, but he's not stupid. He knows he needs a pardon, but he must already have it, because when he publicly broke with the president over one of the most consequential issues to the president, the fictitious claim of election fraud, I thought to myself, Barr's already got his pardon. That he reinforced that for me when he stood up in that press conference and said, no special counsel for a Hunter Biden investigation, no special counsel for an investigation into election fraud, because there was none. Joe Biden won. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the message. He said, no, the federal government will not go to the states and seize voting machines, which is good, because you know what that would be? Theft. And then finally he said, oh, and by the way, I agree with Mike Pompeo. Russia hacked us. Yeah, that whole China might have done it that Trump tried to throw it into the public square. That dog won't hunt. So I literally kept rewinding and watching to make sure it wasn't invasion of the Bill Barr body snatchers, because he broke with the president on issue after issue after issue, all of which were really important issues to Trump. Again, he must already have his pardon, because he sure ain't getting it now.
Well, what do you mean by that? How could he already have a pardon, and what does he need to be pardoned for? And what is the leverage that you assume he must had to have gotten that pardon? Those are three pardons.
Well, he really didn't break with the president until recently. Mm-hmm. So I think he was doing the president's nefarious bidding all along. And probably somewhere along the way, he said, by the way, Mr. President, can you just go ahead and give me that pardon now? And we can, we'll date it for whenever. And why does he need a pardon?
But hold on, is that technically is that transaction? That's something that could have happened privately?
Yeah. There is no requirement in the law that a pardon be made public. There is nothing in the Constitution or in any case that says the moment a president signs a pardon and grants it to somebody, it must be made public. I would call it a pocket pardon. We actually grant people what we call pocket immunity all the time. We only pull it out when it becomes necessary. And the way it becomes necessary, not to turn this into a criminal law 101 class, we will get immunity for a witness that is about to testify in a trial because we think the witness might invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege on the stand. So, but we wait, because when you give somebody immunity, it opens them up to attack by the defense on cross-examination. You're lying, you got immunity, you can say whatever you want. So the oath means nothing to you. So we don't like to grant immunity as prosecutors unless we absolutely have to extinguish somebody's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But sometimes if it's a hostile witness, we don't know until their butt is in the witness chair in open court. And then if they invoke, we say, hang tight. We got some pocket immunity for you. Bam. Now testify, right? We do that. Wow. Pocket pardon, same principle. You don't have to announce that publicly until you have to announce it publicly. When would you have to announce it publicly? If we charged Bill Barr with a crime and he could say, wait a minute, let me take out my pocket pardon.
Right.
So here's why he needs a pardon. Where do we begin, Pete? How about lying to Senator Kamala Harris under oath when he was asked point blank, did Trump ever ask you to investigate it? Anybody? What did he say? Humana. Right. I don't know. Let me grapple with the word suggest. And then he settled on, I don't know. He didn't want to expressly lie. but I don't know is not perjury proof because he did know. And prosecutors never have to take I don't know as a perjury proof answer under oath. Right. That's for openers. He gassed peaceful protesters in Lafayette Park. That is both an assault under the laws of the District of Columbia and a deprivation of your First Amendment right to free speech and peaceably assemble. He was part of the dirty attempted bribery deal of President Zelensky. How do I know that? Donald Trump on the phone call said, I need a favor, though. And by the way, get with my man, Bill Barr, to execute the dirty deed. There's crime after crime. He cut these nefarious deals, which may be criminal, with Mike Flynn. It remains to be seen. We need to investigate that. He lied to the American people about the Mueller report. There's so much he did that is either criminal or dancing around the edges of criminality. We won't know until we investigate it all in the grand jury beginning in January. But you bet Bill Barr needs a pardon.
The things that he did, and you can tell me, but the things that he did which caused some of your former colleagues, prosecutors in the Department of Justice, to resign, those weren't illegal, right? They were just horrible.
We don't know. We don't know what deals were struck behind the scenes with the Roger Stones and the Mike Flynns. Right. And we won't know until we investigate it in the grand jury. So people all along for 4 years have asked questions like, isn't that a crime? Isn't that a crime? Isn't that a crime? And I can say it feels like one, but I, as a prosecutor, former prosecutor, won't know until I investigate it in the grand jury and see if I have enough evidence to bring a charge. Then I can say it's a crime. So
we've got another attorney general, acting attorney general, I guess, till the end here. And we've got about, not that anybody's counting, but I think about 18 days left. What are your concerns, Glenn, in this final stretch for whether to be Department of Justice or whatever conspiracy theory President Trump wants to jump all over, ask the military to declare martial law, which I don't think anybody's going to carry out any of his orders, no matter who it is, anywhere, including the acting AG. But what are your concerns? What are you hearing? What are you thinking? Lay it out hypothetically.
My concerns are that the acting attorney general, this guy, Jeff Rosen, who is not a DOJ guy, he doesn't have a history with the DOJ. Mm-hmm. He was pulled in from the private sector about 18 months ago. I was really concerned when I saw a great piece by Rachel Maddow last week. She cataloged how many of the really bad Bill Barr decisions, the motivator behind that was Jeff Rosen saying, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. So that concerns me. Wow. But here's the good news. With Bill Barr, maybe he did the American people a favor with one foot out the door. With him announcing everything that we just ticked through, I think it's going to be hard for an acting attorney general to come in the 4 weeks he is in that position and contradict everything Bill Barr just said on his way out the door. That will be fraught with peril for him. But I also don't know that he's got a spine. So I don't know that he will stand up to Donald Trump if Donald Trump starts to push him to places that apparently Bill Barr would not be pushed in his final week in office. And then when you talk about the military, let me touch on that for a minute, because I agree with you. I think General Milley, thank goodness, saw the error of his ways after he stood up and apologized to the American people for doing the Bible walk, after gassing the protesters. He said, my bad, I messed up, I shouldn't have done it. And then he stood up and gave that really forceful speech where he said, we in the military are not beholden to a dictator or an autocrat or a king or one man. We will stand up for the Constitution. Yeah. He's not going to let the military be deployed to undermine the election results. I'm pretty confident of that. But I tell you, old Mike Flynn has been out there doing his level or unlevel best. I mean, the man actually said the military should be deployed into the battleground states to rerun the election so Donald Trump wins this time. So here's the good news, Pete, and I'm going to be on a tear. I've done a lot of research on this now. I'm going to be on a tear in the coming days.
Good. I like when you're on a tear.
When you are a retired Army officer, guess what? You can be ordered back to active duty and court-martialed for crimes you committed in retirement. There are two little articles in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 133 and Article 134. Article 133 is conduct unbecoming an officer. Mike Flynn has done that in spades based on his suggestion that the military should go in and rerun the election and declare Donald Trump the winner. Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice is conduct that basically brings disrepute, to the military. He's violated that section as well. The good news is, if the military leadership in January, after Biden is sworn in, does what I believe it should do, they will order him back to active duty and they will court-martial him. There are cases that have been decided that is a lawful constitutional thing to do to a military retiree, and I hope to hell they do it to Mike Flynn.
Wow, that would be very, very interesting. I mean, but this guy, I mean, that suggestion that to have the military come in and rerun the election. Okay, let's play that out, Glenn. We're sitting around the table. Okay, it's one idea. So how would that work? So the military, they force people who people are going to go and are you saying that you're going to have them vote again? They're going to run the whole thing again? And they're going to be how does the military, have anybody thought this through? And the truth is, no one's thought any of it through, because it's all, I think they're all grifting off of Trump. I think they're just using him. And he doesn't even know it. The Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, they know they don't have a case, but they're getting paid. And they're getting, more importantly, their profiles. And that's unfortunately, I think, going to work for a certain segment of Americans.
Don't forget, we just saw the reporting a couple of days ago that the Southern District of New York federal prosecutors were seeking search warrants for Rudy Giuliani's electronic communications,
what was that about?
Right? Well, here's the open question that went unanswered in the recent reporting. When those conversations were being had between the prosecutors in New York, the federal prosecutors, and Maine justice in Washington, D.C., where you do need to get approval if you're going to get a search warrant for attorneys' electronic communications, because you have this concern about not wanting to violate the attorney-client relationship when you collect up that information. So we put what's called a taint team in place to review it before the assigned prosecutors get it. It's a whole big thing. But here is the open question. When the Southern District of New York prosecutors said, yeah, we think we got probable cause to go into Rudy's phone and we want a judge to issue a search warrant, so we're making this request of Maine Justice Bill Barr. What happened after that? I'd like to know. Did Bill Barr put the kibosh on it and say, no, that Rudy's getting too close to Trump. Let's put that on ice. I don't know, but I suspect, and here's what I hope, once Biden takes over, I hope he appreciates the need for transparency, and I hope he cracks open the vaults and he shows us everything that Donald Trump and his corrupt cabal have been up to, because we, the American people, kind of deserve to know what's been going on over the last 4 years.
And finally, I just think that it's really important that obviously the committee chairman will be Democrats in the House, thus being able to conduct investigations. And that's why, and just another reason why the Georgia Senate runoff matters as well, because the Senate, if had a Senate, as my understanding, it would be a tie in the Senate. But so who gets committee chairmanships? I guess the vice president puts it over the top so they get a majority. Either way, if Democrats get the majority in the Senate, they will be able to conduct those investigations in the Senate as well. And those matter, right? They matter. Yeah,
they sure matter, because look, Mitch McConnell, and I don't know why we haven't taken him on. Mitch McConnell has taken all of the legislation duly passed by the House of Representatives and dropped it with glee into the Mitch McConnell graveyard. And we've shrugged our shoulders and said, oh, well, nothing we can do.
Right.
That's on us. That's on us. We should have been attacking that in the courts early and often. We let Mitch McConnell get away with it. The Georgia runoffs are about as important as those kind of elections get.
Glenn Kirschner, always a pleasure. Great talking to you. And everybody should go right now and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow him on Twitter, support him on Patreon, listen to the podcast, watch him on MSNBC, go to his house and open presents with his family. Big plans with the big family, or are you guys keeping it quiet?
I got all 5 of my daughters in from all over, my one son, and we're all going to be together. And, we're just going to kick back and enjoy one another.
Merry Christmas. Thank you for joining me. It's been a great year getting to know you and talking to you and having you on. Everybody loves you, and you've had a hell of a year yourself, and I really appreciate it, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, Glenn Kirschner. Go subscribe to his YouTube channel right now. Go follow him on Twitter. Tell him you heard him here at Glenn Kirschner 2. And Listen to his podcast as well, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, and he's also got a Patreon page if you want to support him. Love when he joins me, and also love my next guest, who is fantastic. He is a journalist. He is a professor at Columbia. He is also just such a great writer. He is the managing editor over at Earther, where he covers climate and environmental related issues. I cover a lot of ground and had a really great conversation with him. Here is my conversation on Twitter, by the way, at Brian Kahn right now. All right, I've got Brian now, and I have to start with an admission. I beg your forgiveness. I was not a subscriber to the Earther newsletter. I have just subscribed, but I am ashamed, and I felt like you should know, and I'm sorry.
I appreciate you admitting that. That takes a big man to admit that you were not, and I appreciate that you now you're on the team. Thank you.
And, just a quick question about it. What can readers expect from the Earther newsletter, Brian?
I mean, it's not quite I was about to soft sell it or like undersell it. I'm gonna go in.
Come on, do this with me.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, you're about to be the luckiest man on earth because you're going to receive this great newsletter.
Great.
It's a highlights of like what the stuff we're working on is and all the, great work that's being produced at Earther. So it's not just me, but, Darna Noor, who's one of our writers. We actually will hopefully, knock on wood, have a new writer soon in the next month starting. So, it's a chance to keep up on all the hottest environmental news, look at it through an environmental justice lens. Occasionally there's cute animals. It's a hodgepodge of everything that you could ever care about.
When you say looking at it through an environmental justice lens, maybe we can start there because you have an environmental justice story I think is really important to talk to at Earther. But how do you define that to all types of people? Environmental justice. It sounds very kind of liberally and socially justice to me, and I'm not sure it makes me feel safe.
Oh man! Well, I want you to feel safe, Pete. So I will do my best to get to that safe space that we need to get to.
Thank you, please.
I want to think about environmental justice. I think it's something that it does have that like maybe just certain folks like a bit of a crunchy vibe, so to speak. But I think what it really is to me is the fact that everyone has a right to clean air, clean water, and the fact of the matter is that even though we should all have those rights, not everyone is able to enjoy them, and they're not distributed equally. There are people that are forced to live with dirty water or no water at all, people that are breathing in toxic air that gives them asthma. And so these are things that when I look at them, I think that's an injustice we should right. And, at the end of the day, like this is something that I think we often think it breaks down on conservative or liberal lines. But, at the end of the day, like clean air is not something that just belongs to one, party or the other. It doesn't belong to one set of people. It's something that we should all be striving for. And so that's how I view it as a way to like, from the liberal side, it's like we should have this common good. But then, if you want to talk conservatively, like, there's a lot of value in like cleaning up that air and making sure that people have economic opportunities and things like that as well. So, it's something that should not be controversial, in my opinion.
So that's a great definition that you gave of environmental justice. And you said all over the world. But I mean, we've got real situations here in America, too. And I want to talk here about your most recent piece on the issue or that filed under environmental justice about slavery on the high seas. But just real quick on this, any example that you would want to give about American environmental justice issues from, indigenous folks to poor folks living in an urban center next to a coal-fired power plant?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most prominent examples and one that I've been thinking about a lot is actually like the Navajo Nation and what's going on there. One of the things that the Navajo Nation relied on for a lot of revenue was this Navajo generating station, which was a coal plant, provided a lot of money. Also, one of the most polluted, it created one of the most polluted zip codes in the country as a result because of just the fact that burning coal is dirty. So on the one hand, they were getting economic benefits. On the other, people were dealing with, the health fallout from these pollutants being deposited on the landscape. That shut down and was actually demolished last week. And so now you're dealing with a different type of environmental justice or injustice where that revenue is gone, the air is cleaner, but the economic opportunity is gone. And so that to me speaks to the fact that, when we're talking about justice, it's partly about making sure people have clean air, but it's also about making sure people have jobs as well that, are part of that 21st century economy.
I mean, if there were justice, you would probably provide opportunities for people who have been most affected by any kind of polluting industry in their community, or even if it was their former job. That's obviously hard to do one-to-one, but that would be the justice. These are the most affected people. let's help them with the solutions to the problem.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think it really speaks to like what's going on in the Navajo Nation. I mean, there's this, it's a very economically depressed place. I lived near there for a while. I lived in New Mexico, and there's not a ton of opportunity, but the fact is that also means, I mean, there's not a lot of opportunity there currently, but that means there's a big opportunity to help lift people out of poverty and like make a big impact if you do these projects right. And, make sure that you're also not just like, I don't want to swoop in and say, hey, like, here's the X, Y, and Z you should do. Like, that's not really even if I wasn't a journalist, it would not be my role. I think It's really up to, letting the folks that live there self-determine the route that they want to go. But there's really there's so much that could happen. And the Navajo Nation could be like a real strong test case for the Green New Deal. That really brings that sort of clean energy jobs and lifts people's livelihoods up. And also, hopefully puts folks on track to like have that long-term success built in so that these jobs don't go away as the economy continues to transition.
You've got this piece filed under environmental justice at Earther titled AI and Satellite Data Could Help End Slavery on the High Seas. I'm sorry, forgive my ignorance, but there is slavery apparently on fishing vessels around the world. I actually did do an interview with a director who made a documentary film about this, and it's escaping me now. But what is the issue? What slavery in the fishing industry? Talk to me about that first.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think surprised me a little bit too. Like it's something I read a little bit about, and then covering this study that came out this week, I was like, whoa, like this is a way bigger problem than you would ever expect. But really what, on some level, fishing boats and fishery industry in general is kind of this ideal grounds for slavery because you have these lightly regulated vessels that can go in and out of ports basically anywhere in the world. And so it's the way you get your fish is also sometimes a vessel for human trafficking as well. So people are forced to work on these ships. They obviously can't, jump out in the middle of the ocean and swim to shore. And when they are at shore, at port, regulations tend to be so light. And certainly the groups like the organized crime that's engaged in this type of, human trafficking around fisheries knows which ports are lightly regulated will go there. So you're just not getting enforcement. So it's basically this ideal scenario where you have forced labor bringing, fish ashore essentially.
And so your piece is about a study that aims to use technology to track ships that traffic these human beings, laborers, as they would maybe call them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting idea because ships are, in theory, supposed to all carry a little satellite tracker to help monitor where they are and, keep an eye on making sure there's, no piracy, things like that. And so these folks use that data along with evidence of, confirmed ships that use slave labor on the ground to start to sort of basically train an algorithm then to figure out what ships exhibit behavior like those that were using slave labor. And so that's a way that they can start to at least identify, they said in the study, they define these as like high risk ships. So ships that were likely to use slave labor based on the behavior they showed. And so that can give a chance for us to now start to think about regulation. How do you start to regulate these ships at ports? If you identify this behavior, then let's track that ship and see where it ends up and maybe do a stronger inspection. Things like that can start to sort of hopefully put an end to slave labor on the high seas.
Yeah, that's awesome. And by the way, that documentary, I looked it up while you're talking here, Ghost Fleet, Slavery in the Thai Fishing Industry. Really good documentary. I highly recommend that. So when I have you on, when I have Brian Kahn on, what I try to do is limit my questions, like one or two to each entry at Earther, because there's so much good stuff, but I wish I could just keep talking to you about each one. That said, let me go back to what we were just talking about. You mentioned the Navajo Nation, and you have a piece about Biden's team. The Climate Corps of Joe Biden's cabinet is perfectly fine. Such a great title. And it's a really great piece, but I just wanted to get your take on, because you write most extensively about probably one of the most little known of the cabinet secretaries that he's appointed, Congresswoman named Deborah Haaland. He has appointed her for Interior Secretary, and it's such a big deal. But I think we first have to explain to people why it's a big deal because of what the Interior Department does, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, the Interior Department is basically the land agency of the U.S. So, it's 500 million acres of federal land are under its purview. And, most of that land is land that was taken from tribes and became property of the government. there are lots of treaties that entitle tribes to certain rights in that land and plenty of other ways that, tribes are allowed to use it. But traditionally, it's been basically used as an economic engine, whether it's oil and gas extraction or mining or national parks, that kind of stuff. And so having somebody who's indigenous, who has, been engaged with a lot of these movements around land back. I mean, she went to Standing Rock and cooked there, so she's been engaged in these pipeline battles. To have someone like that.
That was a major, in case anybody missed it, Standing Rock, which was a huge protest over a pipeline. Back
and it was led by indigenous members of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe.
Yep.
So it's kind of wild. I mean, like, anyone that Biden was going to choose would have been like just a total whiplash compared to the fact that we've had a fossil fuel lobbyist and then this Ryan Zinke, who is a grifter, kind of back to the land, fake cowboy fella.
My opinion is that he is a massive asshole who fucking rode in on an actual horse. He's a former special forces guy. He did all kinds of corrupt bullshit. Just not a good person. And that was the first Secretary of the Interior, and some of the moves that they did to tribal lands. I think you had a tweet or a post about how he put up a picture in his office of a tribal land he himself shrank for development. It's so horrible. And the second Secretary of the Interior was actually an actual bulldozer. He appointed an actual piece of machinery to be the secretary. He appointed fire, I think. Who was it again?
Totally. No, I think it was just a pile of coal is what ended up becoming the Secretary of Interior.
Well, he was a lobbyist in some coal industry.
Yeah, he was a fossil fuel lobbyist.
Yeah.
And so, these people are extreme reactionaries. They're absolutely terrible for public lands. So anyone Biden was going to pick was going to be like, if not a 180, like at least a 179 or, 175, whatever you might want to call it, degree flip from them. But you take someone like Deb Haaland, and that is like, it's hard to put into words like how monumental it is to see somebody who is indigenous, who values public lands, who respects tribes, who believes in these treaty rights, step into that role, both just from like the sense of there's certainly the representation aspect, but the fact that she is incredibly qualified. She's extremely smart. She's well liked in Congress, and I think will be, a potentially very transformational Interior Secretary as a result.
Let me just ask you real quick, if I could, on just a couple other names that I wanted to get you to weigh in on. First of all, who is Michael Regan? Never heard of him until he was appointed
he's a little wild card.
Head of the EPA. Black guy, which is obviously important, but what do you think of his appointment, head of EPA? Again, better than a barrel of oil, which is who ran it.
Totally. First. Yeah. No, all these folks are like light years beyond who they're replacing. But, I think his record is really interesting. I think it's mostly good. He's gotten a lot of praise from activists for how he handled these, they're called, forever chemicals. They're called PFAS, essentially. They're these chemicals that never disappear and are, can have all sorts of negative health impacts. And he's done a really good job at regulating them in North Carolina as the head of the state's Department of Environmental Quality. He's gotten, some environmental justice initiatives off the ground. So there's a lot of good things to like about him. We actually just published a piece today, though, that focuses on his history with the biomass industry. So there's this whole industry that transforms trees into wood pellets that are then burned for energy, like coal, essentially. And the argument is that because the trees grow back eventually, it sucks up the carbon, it's all carbon neutral. It's kind of it's basically an accounting loophole that these industries rely on to claim they're renewable. And that is one area where he has not done a super great job in North Carolina, which is like kind of ground zero for this industry, where there, these companies that are chopping down trees on private land, turning them into pellets and all that stuff. And so, I'm curious. I think that some of the reasons why his record on that is not super great has to do with the legislature there and the governor and priorities. Things could be really different at the EPA, but it is like a little, if not quite a red flag, it's kind of an orange flag, so to speak.
The equivalent for who Donald Trump chose to run all of these agencies and arguably, they all need to deal with the climate crisis, each one of them. You've written a lot about that as well, which I think is super important. But I think the equivalent for Biden would be to pick an actual activist who is a vegan, who lives in a shack, or in an earth home, who has such a no carbon footprint or investment in. That would be the equivalent for Biden to pick, because Donald Trump picked the people who actually wanted to destroy these agencies in the land and that they protect. But the middle ground, or the more moderate choice, is a guy like Regan from government, who is everybody's going to be somehow involved, or if you want to say compromised one way or another. In this case, it's the timber industry and wood pellets. OK, we'll work on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would push back a little bit. I don't know if we need to go all the way to like the activists living in like an Earth ship or whatever. Like that could be interesting. But I think it's like you want that degree, that you want people that know what they're doing as well, and that are like, that have shown the ability to get the work done. And so, like, for example, like, Michael Regan, again, may very well do like a really awesome job without having the shackles of like the North Carolina legislature on him. He may very well go on and like do a ton of stuff on biomass that's awesome. And so, it's not for me to say like right now, like where he could go. They're just, these little warning signs that we kind of picked up on. But I think, like overall pretty good. If there's someone that we could go further with, I think there are a couple of candidates out there that had been considered and, didn't make the final cut, but there are certainly worse people that have a history of like getting stuff done, not being compromised, and like knowing the deal and having like that activist, street cred as well.
Well, I'm surprised that someone with your stature would push back on me that way. But duly noted that you're absolutely right. I mean, very hyperbolic with my example. I'm thinking of the equivalent of a Trump, but what you're saying is there are plenty of other people that activists actually supported and wanted that would have been just as qualified. It wouldn't have had some of these stains, if you will, and that person is somewhere between Regan and my vegan shack living person. So, real quick, Jennifer Granholm. At Energy. I love Jennifer Granholm. I know her, I don't want to say personally, but I've worked with her on panels and at CNN, and she's been on my show. I've interviewed her several times, and I just want to say this about her. When you're with her and you're talking to her, she is absolutely a person who makes you feel like the most important person in the room. And that's not common in both government powerful people, Hollywood circles and entertainment and media circles that I've traveled in. It's just not. I admire her character and the way that she treats and talks to people. So just that's my personal compliment to her. But what do you think in terms of her qualifications and what she'll be able to do at Energy and why that matters?
I mean, I think same deal, very competent, has a record of success. I mean, she's done a lot of work on the auto industry. For some folks, there may be some red flags about like, okay, well, like we need to be moving towards more public transit, or, she could have done more in that regard as opposed to just helping the auto industry that's kind of entrenched. But, again, like Michigan governor, that's the deal. And so it's kind of understandable where she was coming from. And I think, ultimately, like the biggest thing that the Department of Energy can do is like ramp up R&D, do lots of work on clean cars, clean power, moonshot technologies that might really like help to rapidly decarbonize that, are just in their very early phases. Like, I think she's really well suited for that.
I was just going to say one thing about her that you made me think of there, which is the one thing that a lot of the Trump, and I'm being entirely serious here, cabinet secretaries, not all of them, but several of them, or people that worked for him, were good at was going on television and doing interviews and giving speeches. And that's because that's where he found them. On television, but they were good at communicating and they could bowl over their, like this asshole Peter Navarro or even Scott Atlas. Like they're good at talking. In this case, I think that's important. And I think it's important quality for your Secretary of Energy or anyone else to be good at communicating. Jennifer Granholm, I heard her in an interview the other day, Brian, and she in like a minute and a half gave a succinct explanation of why we should be the future country making and creating jobs in renewable energy instead of buying it from somewhere else. And I think that the communication skills she has are great. So I just want to add that. But before I lose you here, I got to ask you about this major news that, let's see how old it is now, maybe a couple of weeks. And you wrote about it December 9th at Earther. New York State just set a new standard for fossil fuel divestment. Great piece by you. Everybody should read this. How do we put into perspective, real quick, if you could, the divestment movement, what it is, and then I guess fit in how big of a deal New York's move on it was?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I feel like I'll do this over Zoom. I'm going to raise the roof because I think it's a huge deal. And I'm really excited about it.
All right, I'll take it. Awesome.
So, yes, I mean, the divestment movement, I mean, essentially, it's this idea that, you can't dig up fossil fuels if you don't have money. And all of these pension funds, your 401k, like that's where the money that these fossil fuel companies get is. Either you're investing directly in them or you're investing in banks that borrow for them, things like that. So the goal is to basically, if you take away the money pipeline, you stop the actual construction of these pipelines and the extraction of fossil fuels. So the divestment movement, it's been going on, I'd say 6, 7, maybe 8 years. But it's really picked up steam over the past 2 or 3 years as, universities get their endowment out of fossil fuels. And then what happened last week with New York, or I guess it was the week before, is the state, New York State, took its pension fund and said, we are going to decarbonize the pension fund. We're going to get out of fossil fuels. And they laid out a really bullet point by bullet point systematic plan of how they're going to do it. So it's going to start off with how do we stop investing in companies like Exxon, which is, pretty straightforward. You just, that's a bad company. We know they have a crappy climate plan. So let's get out of there. But then it's kind of moving down the line to looking at, pipeline companies, then the companies that sort of provide these drilling rigs. So, your Halliburtons of the world, things like that. And it's just a step by step, this is what we're going to do. And then it says, after that, what we're going to do is, so that all happens by 2025. So pretty short time frame, 4 years to completely divest. And then they want to go even further and basically make sure that nothing that they are investing in is a harm to the climate. And they're using the Paris Agreement goals to say, if we want to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius, then is this company that we're investing in doing that? And so, we're talking about things like Ford, for example. So they can go to Ford and say, hey, we have let's say $300 million investment in you. What are you going to do decarbonize by this time frame that we need to? And if Ford's like, oh, we're not going to do it, they're going to say, well, we're not going to invest in you. And that's basically, that's the path forward.
One quick follow up on the divestment movement, Brian. You're generally, the movement is generally talking about countries, universities, cities, in this case, and their endowments, their investment portfolio. And I always criticize, the argument that, folks on the right, whatever you want to say, use to ridicule people who are aware and concerned about the climate, saying, well, why don't you stop doing this? Why don't you stop buying that car? Don't go on planes, all that, stop eating meat, all that, because one person's individual action doesn't make as much of a difference as mass action. We know that, obviously. But when it comes to divestment, how important is it, would you say, and what do we know about individuals, me, you, my wife and I, changing whatever we have invested in our retirement, like my retirement account. When we moved brokers, one of the reasons was to have a more investment, socially conscious investment, specifically when it comes to climate. And we did that, and it's exciting. It's cool. What would you say that we individuals can do if we have any money at all saved, number one, about our own personal divestment, and does that matter?
I think it matters in a few ways. I think there's a personal commitment to it when you make a personal commitment to, climate conscious decisions, I think there's a lot of value in that in terms of reinforcing your own belief system and doing the right thing. With the acknowledgement that obviously you need these big movers, New York State's pension fund is the third biggest pension fund in
such a big
the
deal.
U.S. It's huge. That's going to move a lot more than I don't know. Maybe Pete, you're super, maybe you got $300 billion or whatever it is lying around that you have invested in fossil fuels. But, for me, not quite at that level. But, it's when I make those moves, it's not going to have the same thing. But so I think there's a couple things. One is, individually, it's good to just align yourself. Another option is that there are these groups that are kind of doing this together. So there's a lot of pressure last year and this year actually on banks to stop funding Arctic drilling. And a big part of that was getting people to show up and basically call their banks on a given day and say, I'm going to close my account with you, Chase. And the reason why is because you fund Arctic drilling. And that pressure campaign eventually worked. Now, as of the end of this year, all major U.S. banks have gotten out of Arctic drilling. And some of that's economics because it's not really worth it. But some of that is also because of the fact that people showed up and said, hey, I don't want you handling my money because of the crap you're doing with it. And so I think there's a lot of value in finding ways to sync up your individual actions with other like-minded people. And that's where you can start to really affect change.
And if you're making individual purchases and you're thinking about being more sustainable in your day-to-day purchases and consumption, then I think it's worth thinking about your retirement account, which is there's no work there. There's no action. So talk to your broker, whoever you talk to, your uncle. You probably got a guy, whoever's listening. All right, Brian, do you have time for one last question?
I do.
Okay. I'm really interested and excited about the legislation that might come out. And I'm confused now. I haven't been paying close enough attention to what's the budget and what the Senate is doing. But you have a great piece at Earther. The Senate agrees to a plan to phase out a dangerous greenhouse gas. Of course, we're talking about methane here, right? But
methane.
We're not talking about methane? Oh, we're talking about HFCs. Forgive me, right?
Yeah, even worse.
Explain. Chlorofluorocarbons are worse than methane as a greenhouse gas. They're not all equal, folks.
No, they're not all equul. These are like some of the worst ones around. They're these are like the Donald Trumps of like greenhouse gases. Essentially,
HFC.
Total nightmare.
I am an HFC. I'm worse than methane, who's basically methane is like the rainbow, but I am. This is how we make HFCs sexy, Brian. This bipartisan climate policy to reduce hydrofluorocarbons. Am I pronouncing it right? HFCs.
Yeah, you got it. Hydrofluorocarbons.
How is this happening? What would the interest in Republicans? What would their interest be in doing the responsible thing here for?
I mean, the big thing is like, it's a huge job creator. I mean, the thing is like reducing any emissions will inevitably be a job creator. But the biggest thing with HFCs is, they're refrigerants. So they're put in your fridge or AC, things like that. They have, 11,000 times the warming potential of carbon dioxide. They're super bad for the atmosphere. So if you're like a climate person, you're like, these things are the Donald Trump of climate, essentially. But if you are a Republican, you also see potentially a really important business opportunity for companies that manufacture alternatives to these chemicals. So we want to get rid of them. We get rid of them, they got to be replaced with something, because New York in the summer, like, you need an AC, right? If you're in Indonesia, you really need an AC. And so the companies that make these chemicals can actually take them back, they can dispose of them, they can also manufacture new ones. And that's kind of where this all comes from, is like, there's the liberal argument, save the climate, there's conservative argument. This makes, I think it's a $12 billion boost to the economy to get out of HFCs and manufacture the alternatives, creates tens of thousands of jobs in chemical companies. And so that's where this kind of bipartisan agreement finally came together.
Well, it's so well explained to all of these. And sometime we should just have a longer conversation about the argument that resonates so well on the right. Listen, I want to do the right thing, but we can't kill the economy. We can't kill all these jobs, because the opposite is true. And I would love to talk with you at length about why that is. Renewable energy future, fighting the climate crisis, actually is the best thing we can do for the economy, is the way I see it. But
totally, it's the ultimate economic stimulus, and we also get to keep a habitable planet, which seems pretty good too.
It's like Green New Deal is already like, I feel like we need a new phrase right away, and then they'll kill that one too. Obviously, they'll demagogue that one as well. But we need to talk about what that is and get under the hood at some point. I won't take up any more of your time. I so appreciate your work. Subscribe to the newsletter, follow Brian on Twitter, and of course, read him at Earther. Thank you very much, sir. Always appreciate it.
So happy to be here. Thanks.
All right, Brian Kahn of Earther. Check him out on Twitter. Follow him. Tell him you heard him right here on Stand Up, and subscribe to their newsletter. It's really great. I'm enjoying it already. Okay, that's it for me today. Thank you to all of you who joined us last night. Thank you to all of you who have been subscribing and supporting this podcast and the community that goes with it. I really appreciate that. Merry Christmas to you and all of your family. May you have a safe and happy holiday. If you're celebrating it, I'm going to take tomorrow off, and then I will be back here on Monday with you. And all of next week, Taint Week, I'm planning on posting podcasts. They might be a little abbreviated without all of the news segments and so on, but I'll have new interviews, new guests, new episodes of Stand Up all next week. I hope you'll listen. I hope you'll tell your friends. I hope you'll give it a review. And I hope that you're not alone. If you're a member of the Stand Up community, join us on the Discord platform anytime, 24/7. I love you. I appreciate your support. And I will talk to you next week, if not sooner.